We have evolved on a watery planet. In our everyday lives, we try to make sure we're never far from a supply of water. The human body can lose water in many different ways. On a day trip like this, through one of the hotter parts of the world, father and daughter will both place great demands on their body's water control systems. Their bodies are really a filter for fluid, in one end and out the other. In between the two ends, their bodies will sweat, breathe, eat, drink, and urinate. Each of these ordinary human activities will affect the inside of the body by adding or subtracting water. On the whole, it doesn't matter too much if we take in extra water, but the body soon suffers if we lose too much. If the body's water content drops, it's not long before we start noticing the effects. After a 5% loss, we become very thirsty, 10% and we're very ill. And if water resources drop 20% or more, we die, with 30 or more quarts still left in the body. Our internal fluid is salty, like the sea. Perhaps this is a reminder of the fact that fish were our remote ancestors. In fact, the balance of chemicals in body fluid is very close to the composition of seawater, but much more dilute. The way our cells work now depends on the right balance of sodium and chloride, and that means salt. Salt plays a vital part in the workings of the body, and it can only do this if it's carried in just the right concentration in the fluid that bathes the cells. It could mean disaster for these red blood cells if the salt in the surrounding fluid were too concentrated or too dilute. These cells are swelling up because the concentration of salt outside the cell is lower than inside. As they lose their disc-like shape, they could eventually burst and spill their contents. If there's too much salt around the cells, they suffer an equally disastrous fate. The pressure difference causes them to start to collapse. The cell membrane becomes crinkled, and they're unable to do their job. To avoid such a drastic state of affairs, the body has an early warning system, the feeling of thirst. Thirst is triggered as the blood becomes increasingly concentrated. There are many substances that are dissolved in our blood, minerals, hormones, food molecules, and so on. If we didn't drink when we needed to, other activities could cause our water level to drop. Sweating and urinating, for example. As we lose water, the dissolved substances become packed more closely together. It's this greater concentration of the blood that gives an early warning of danger. If we don't replace the lost water, the level in the blood will continue to drop. We don't usually take an active interest in the concentration of salts in our blood, but we're all familiar with the sensation of thirst, which is just the body's way of warning us that its cells might be in danger. Father and daughter are on their way to visit friends, so they know they won't have too long to wait for a drink. Or will they?
I don't know what's wrong with this thing.
Unfortunately, in these conditions, the body can lose water very quickly, and many of its activities use up precious water supplies. Muscle contraction, for example, generates heat and increased sweating. Because he's breathing more heavily, he loses more water in his breath. If there's no water to replace these losses, his blood will become more and more concentrated and lead to a greater and greater feeling of thirst. The sensation of thirst begins in this tiny area of the brain. The blood flows past nerve cells that taste its saltiness. If it's too salty and needs to be diluted, the nerve cells alert other parts of the brain and produce the feeling we know as thirst.
Have some water.
There is, in fact, more than one type of thirst. He felt thirsty because he had lost a lot of water. But she feels thirsty because she ate too much salt earlier in the day. Like her father's blood, hers has also become more concentrated, but for the opposite reason. In fact, there's a daily need for salt, just as we need a certain amount of water. Many foods have salt in them, and the taste itself can be quite attractive, in moderation. Mealtimes play havoc with our water balance, since we usually take in both salt and water when we eat. And there's one further factor. All this steak and French fries are going to need powerful digestive juices to break them down, and that uses up some of the body's internal water supplies. Digestive juices are produced by cells which extract water from the blood and pump it into the digestive tract. But when this water is taken from the blood, salt goes with it. So we're losing water from the body, but the saltiness of the blood doesn't change. This means that the thirst centers in the brain aren't affected. They only detect increased saltiness. And yet a loss of water on its own does produce thirst. We often feel thirsty when we eat, for example, because we're using up water to digest the food. There are other detector cells for this type of water loss. In the walls of the heart and large blood vessels, there are cells which signal if the body's fluid level drops. This also leads to a strong feeling of thirst and makes sure we replace the fluids we've lost. This alarm system is most useful when we lose a lot of fluid due to bleeding. Massive hemorrhage can lead to a strong feeling of thirst, as the body alerts us to the need to replace the fluid quickly, before the heart fails.
Oh, you get so thirsty out here. It's so hot.
Yeah, we'll stop here in a few minutes out here.
For humans, drinking is not just a means of topping up the body's water supplies. We get pleasure from it, and like eating, drinking has a social function. Animals seem to lack this social lubricant. Like man, they have specific appetites for water and salt, but they don't seem to get the same pleasure we do from drinking more than they need.
Is that a dun color, Tully?
No, it's Palomino.
That one there?
Yeah.
When animals drink, they only take in enough to replace what they've lost. They seem to have an accurate water meter with the ability to judge exactly how much they've taken in at any time.
Okay.
Davia, let's go.
I'll see you later. Take care.
If we take in too much fluid, sooner or later there'll be an easy and familiar way to get rid of any excess. While we can take in water at any time and in any place, we're more choosy about when and where we get rid of it. The main voluntary means of getting rid of extra water in the body is by urination.
Hey, good to see you. Yeah, hey. Hi, I'll be back in just a few minutes.
The buildup of urine and the way we excrete it are under the control of a system that allows us a lot of freedom. Although there are times when, if you've got to go, you've got to go. The fluid that leaves the body is a very different composition from anything we might have drunk. As we can see with this optical technique, it's at body heat and is much more like one of the other body fluids. It's full of dissolved chemicals, most of them molecules that would build up to harmful levels if we didn't get rid of them. It even has a few surprises, like these beautiful urine crystals. These are merely the end products of some of the chemical activities in our tissues. The formation of urine starts in the blood. The blood plasma needs to get rid of excess water and waste molecules, but they're mixed up with many useful substances that the body needs to hold on to. It's this system, the kidneys, ureters, and bladder, that deals with the complex task of removing from the blood just those components we don't need and excreting them. These images use radioactive blood to trace the path of the urine as it's extracted in the kidneys, seeps down the ureters, and builds up in the bladder. As the blood flows through, the kidneys perform a remarkable feat. They seem to be able to pick and choose what to take out of the blood and what to leave in. The kidneys are acting like a filter, but they're rather cleverer than a normal filter like this sieve. Here, anything smaller than the holes in the sieve passes through, and larger objects are held back. But our kidneys are able to put back substances after they've slipped through the holes, if we need them in the body. We have two kidneys, which provide more than enough tissue to do the job. We could actually get by with less than a third as much. Their position in the body reflects the crucial role they have in filtering the blood. They lie very close to the main artery and vein that run down the middle of the body. With every heartbeat, the kidneys receive a quarter of the body's blood supply. The blood is forced into the kidney through a system of blood vessels that return it to the main circulation after it's been filtered. In the course of a day, the blood flow through our kidneys is as much as 200 times our total blood volume. This means that 1,000 quarts of blood passes through them every day. If the kidneys had to filter the contents of this swimming pool, they'd do it in a couple of months. If the kidneys were an ordinary filter, they'd hold on to the larger components, like red blood cells and hormone molecules, and let through everything smaller. This would include many useful substances like salt and glucose, which would be washed away in the urine. Instead, the kidneys have developed this clever filter that can save these useful substances and put them back in the body. These patterns in the kidney mark out a series of closely packed tubes, each of them dealing with a single droplet of blood. At the start of each tube is a basket of tiny blood vessels through which fluid under pressure leaks out of the blood. This is really the nearest thing to a sieve in the kidney, because it does have tiny holes that let through molecules below a certain size. There are more than 1 million of these in each kidney, and their total surface area in the body is nearly 10 square feet. Stretching away from each sieve is a tube, the nephron. The fluid that's to become the urine squeezes through the sieve at one end and travels along this tube. In fact, a nephron is not stretched out straight, but follows a hairpin path from the sieve at one end to the main urine ducts at the other. The nephron is hugged all along its length by blood vessels, waiting to take back some of the ingredients of the urine. As the liquid travels down the nephron, it's still carrying useful molecules like glucose, the red squares. The glucose molecules are small enough to slip through the sieve, but we can use glucose for energy, and it's recaptured. It passes through the walls of the nephron and back into the bloodstream. This system is usually very efficient. More than 99% of the glucose that tries to escape is put back into the blood. There are two other important substances the body tries to retrieve as the urine is being formed. One of them is water, and this has a useful relationship with the other, salt, which means they can both be conserved at the same time. When the salt is in the blood, it's in a dissolved form rather than in crystals like these, so its molecules are small enough to slip through the sieve at the top of the nephron, along with the water that carries it. As it travels along this tube, the salt receives the same sort of treatment as the glucose we saw earlier. It's pumped out of the nephron back into the bloodstream. Here, the green squares are the salt. This time, an interesting thing happens. The water, the blue dots, follows the salt back into the blood. In this way, the kidney recaptures both salt and water at the same time, making sure we don't lose too much of either. By the time the fluid is flowed from one end of the nephron to the other, the kidney has recaptured many useful substances and put them back into the bloodstream. So efficient are the kidneys that about 99% of the volume of fluid that flows through them is put back into the blood. The remaining 1%, a quart or so a day, will head towards the bladder and the outside world.
Take care.
Bye.
Up to now, he's not really aware of any of this complex activity in the kidneys, but the next stage will occupy more of his attention. The kidneys and bladder are part of the body's waste disposal system. Many of the chemical activities that go on in the body give off byproducts, industrial pollution if you like, and the body uses our excess water to carry them away. The rate at which we build up urine varies with the temperature. On a hot day like this, the kidneys don't produce as much urine as when it's cold, because the body gets rid of a lot of water by sweating. The way the system gets rid of urine is a much simpler business than the filtration in the nephrons. It's really a straightforward bit of plumbing. 5 separate lobes of the kidney trickle their urine into this space. The tiny amounts of urine from each nephron gather together and emerge into the center of the kidney. Here, waves of contraction start to pump the urine towards the bladder. The urine leaves the kidneys along the ureters, the two tubes that lead to the bladder. Here, inside a living human, we can follow the path the urine takes from the kidney to the bladder. After about half a cup of urine has trickled into the bladder, we start to feel a sense of pressure, although not so strongly that we need to urinate. As more urine pours in, it stretches the bladder walls. They contain a special type of muscle that helps us avoid too much discomfort by only warning us now and then that the bladder is getting fuller. In this way, we are gently reminded of the need to urinate, rather than constantly harassed by an expanding bladder. The increased pressure closes off the exit from the ureters and prevents the urine flowing back towards the kidneys. More and more urine trickles in until the bladder contains more than a cup and a half. At this stage, the bladder will start sending more urgent messages to the brain.
Boy, I gotta go to the bathroom.
From now on, he'll have less choice. The bladder can hold a maximum of just under 2 cups before things start to feel painful. The final stage in this process is to relax the muscles at the exit of the bladder and allow the urine to leave. In men, the urethra, the tube from the bladder to the penis, is quite long, 8 inches or so. In women, it's only a little over an inch. That may be why women are more prone to bladder infections than men, because bacteria from outside have a shorter journey. Men also have to squeeze muscles in the urethra to get rid of the remaining urine. But in women, the shorter urethra empties by gravity alone. When we release the muscles at the exit of the bladder, the pressure in the muscular walls pushes out the urine. In a few seconds, the bladder collapses as the urine rushes down the final pathway to the outside world. In a man, there's one more useful design feature. The final inches of the urethra give a useful spin to the urine as it emerges from the penis, rather like a bullet from a rifle. This helps to contain the urine in a neat and purposeful stream. For all of us, water input must balance water output. By eating and drinking, we look after the input. By sweating, breathing, and urinating, we carefully adjust the output. And the purpose of all this is so that the body's cells can get on with their everyday activities in a calm and peaceful internal environment without being poisoned, drowned, or dehydrated.